Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Baron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I am so happy to have my good friend David Hanson back. David is the founder of Winthrop and Associates. David was on the pod, I guess maybe a couple years ago, and we did a
Mhm.
whole episode on blue ocean thinking, which David is a big proponent of, as am I. And we're going to kind of bring that back today and talk a little bit about strategy and this idea behind thinking about strategy from the perspective of how can you win your market? Like, how in a very competitive environment right now where schools are, competing against other independent schools, public schools, charter schools, day schools, I mean, online schools, micro schools, like just keep going. There's just so many options. How do
Mhm.
you build strategy that wins the market? So we're going to get into that in just a little bit. But before we do, David Hanson, welcome back to the pod.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Oh, always a pleasure to have you here. And in case somebody did not hear our episode from a couple years back, let's start by introducing yourself and the work that you do at Winthrop and Associates.
Sure. Winthrop and Associates is a boutique consulting firm, really specializing in nonprofit, college, and school-based needs. We do legal consulting, financial planning, strategy, and risk management for schools in general. So, founded 9 years ago, and going strong.
No, that's great. And I know you're a big strategic thinker. You've done a lot of work around blue ocean theory. I'm curious, we have talked about this endlessly, over the last few months and really thinking about like Roger Martin's playing to win framework and how that defines strategy as a choice about where to play and how to win. And certainly, Tom Olverson in his book Leading Through Strategy gets into that too. He does a brilliant job of laying it all out there. But for you, like when you look at strategy through that lens for independent schools, what do you think that most schools may be missing when it comes to that type of approach to strategy?
Probably, probably two things. I think strategic plans often develop into a very lengthy to-do list instead of an integrated plan across the institution. They can be very siloed. So admissions will do this, philanthropy will do this, business office will do this. The integrated approach, I think, is missing. The second thing I think most schools try to do with their strategic plans is to be all things to all people in their market. And I think that's a mistake right out of the gate.
Yeah. Do you think that's a mistake from the standpoint of it's really hard to fund something like that? Is it, yeah.
Right. So I'm a long-term CFO, and I think about everything in terms of funding and dollars. Unless you are exceptionally well endowed and you have a lot of unrestricted funds, it's hard to choose 10 different things and do them all well.
Right.
Right. And you're much better off, in my opinion, to choose two, properly fund them, execute them, and deliver on your promise, on your brand promise. And I think many schools get into the habit, maybe not the habit, but the choice of trying to do too much with their strategic plan.
So, David, why do you think schools make commitments to a lot of different initiatives?
I think market pressure, right? I think market pressure is real. Schools are all seeking a smaller and declining population of full pay students, and no two full pay students are the same. No two families are the same, right? So it's a cost benefit trade off if you're going to really define what you are, what you will do, and think about maybe losing 10 full pay families as a result of that.
Right.
So I think the cost benefit trade off scares many schools. And instead of making that trade off, they try to do all things well.
Right, which is, given limited resources, always
Right.
it's a tough promise to make if you're gonna do all things for all people. Um, I'm curious, we, have talked about strategy, and then you and I had a conversation, I don't know, maybe it was a couple months ago, and we really kept zeroing in on the business model and
Mhm.
how a lot of strategy layers on top of a business model that's inherently, stressed, right? We hear this from schools all over the country. It's getting harder and harder with each passing
Mhm.
year. And then we build strategy and bolt it on top, which adds additional stress. And you and I are now thinking very clearly around, well, if you don't assess the challenges within the model right now and root strategy starting there, then you really make it very difficult to have long-term success. You are so brilliant in talking about that. Like, expand on that if you don't mind.
So, if you're thinking back 15 years when NAIS started actually publishing articles about the broken business model.
Right.
So, in the independent school world, the business model and the limitations and problems with it have been well known for a while, right? We do not charge what it costs to educate, and we certainly do not charge to make a profit. So the model has been stressed for some time. And the way I see it as a visual learner is if you're trying to build a second floor on a basement that's cracked and a first floor that's really under pressure, there's no way the second floor can actually function, right? It's unusable. And I see that with strategic planning, having gone through several rounds at the institutions I've worked for and the institutions I work with. There's this assumption that whatever we're building next must be built on what we have now without taking a moment to reflect about the basement and first floor, the foundation of the school before building anything new. And I think before you jump into any strategic plan, no matter how successful the last one was, you need to pause for probably 3 to 6 months and really investigate your business model and on both sides of the ledger, the revenue side and the expense side, and determine whether you're building a new plan on something that's healthy or fractured.
Yeah. And, to be fair, I think that, as we've built strategy and built it on top of models that may be stressed, I think for a long time it actually kind of worked, right? Because the
Mhm.
problems weren't quite as acute as what we're seeing right now. But, as I've covered on this pod for the last 2 years, like, coming out of COVID, that was really an accelerant on the challenges facing the model. And now with everything that schools are facing, from rising costs to declining rates to increasing tuitions that are putting it out of reach for some families, like, it's just a different era, and I feel that, like, when I talk to heads, David, I feel that tension. It's a
Mhm.
very real thing for a lot
It's
of folks
real.
out there. Yeah,
It's real. And in addition to everything you mentioned, Peter, going back to what you said at the beginning of the podcast, there are just far more options
yeah,
for families, and the options are getting better and better and better. 20 years ago, most academically oriented families would not have seriously looked at online schools for their children. They would have sent them to an elite day or boarding school. The online schools now are actually very high quality,
yeah.
right? So it's the competition in the market that is requiring schools to think differently about how they move forward.
Yeah, and what's interesting about those online schools is they don't have generations of, tradition and kind of constraining their ability to try different things. Like, it's just part of the mindset to iterate and to change because these schools are so young, and they've probably had to do a lot of that over the last 5, 10 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you're right about COVID. I mean, COVID pulled the curtain back in a lot of ways. And but for many of the government programs, schools would have been, out of their markets probably during or maybe even before COVID.
Yeah. In Playing to Win, there's the argument that real strategy is all about making hard choices, right? And you talked a little bit about that, like, what are the choices that you're going to make, and that trying to kind of build consensus around a bunch of things is really difficult to pull off because of the funding issue that we've talked about and all the other things. um, when you think about independent schools, what does a genuine where to play choice look like for an independent school, and what does it feel like to make that choice?
So you have to be willing to choose to stop doing things. And I see that as a real limitation in what many schools are willing to do. Choice is about what you add, it's also about what you subtract. And that's why I like Blue Ocean. One of the core components of Blue Ocean is deciding what you will not do anymore.
Yeah.
So that set of choices, that conversation is often not present in strategic planning circles, at least what I've seen in the last 25 years.
So doing like a real audit of, okay, here are the programs, Here's what here's the revenue it makes, here's the
Mhm.
what it costs, here's the impact to mission in making hard choices around, hey, we can't do everything.
Right. Not only programs, you have to think about infrastructure, facilities, systems, people, right? Vendors, insourcing, outsourcing, fractionalizing. You have to think about all of those categories in order to decide how to rebuild your model.
Yeah. Well, let's dig into that because like if a leader is like, David, you're making a lot of sense. What do they need to understand about how they make money and how they spend it?
So I think there's an opportunity when you enter a strategic planning cycle to take a look at your staffing model, right? 60 to sometimes as high as 80% of your cost is staffing, salaries and benefits. So that's a huge chunk of the business model for schools. And I think there's an opportunity to take a look at that model, what you need now, what you'll need in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, and start to reconfigure the staffing model and think about it as an opportunity, which may rely on thinking differently about the FTE model at schools, thinking differently about fractionalizing, maybe outsourcing. I think all of those have to be at least discussed as part of the strategic planning process.
And then what should people know about the revenue side?
The revenue side is no longer tuition and fees, right? So for decades, centuries, schools operated on a tuition and fee model. And many of our facilities, aren't used in the summers, in the evenings, on weekends. I think what used to be called alternative revenue, and I don't use that term, I use the term core non-tuition revenue. So I think schools need to think about how to use their facilities in a more integrated way year round and offer programs that would drive revenue, maybe not even to their community, maybe to the nearby community, or maybe to communities that want to come and visit their schools in ways that they haven't done before. And I think the revenue side has to be looked at as an opportunity for diversification. You don't want all of your revenue coming from one or two primary sources. Those days are past for our industry.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the MBOA data, I mean, what tuition is covering now in terms of the total operating is it's getting stressed more and more I mean, like by significant numbers.
Correct. And the schools with large endowments are not necessarily protected, right? We saw that in 2008 when the market crashed and many of the large schools lost 25-30% of their endowment value. So the revenue side of the ledger has to be thought of as an opportunity to expand the types and sources of revenue that can come into the school, some of which may not seem comfortable for many
I was just
schools.
going to use that word. Like, I think what I'm hearing around both the expense and the revenue side, like potentially you're going to feel some discomfort.
You're going to feel some discomfort. You may have to partner with organizations that you might not have wanted to partner with
Mm,
before. And of course, there are some mission questions in there, right? You never want to partner with an organization that is, opposite of your mission. But there are a lot of ways to think about these revenue drivers that are mission appropriate. And for the schools who have a strategy to build endowment so they can lower the growth of tuition and fees, the reality is that building endowment is hard and it takes generations. If you look at the schools that have endowments of 500 million or more, those were not built in decades. They were built over a century in most cases, unless a school is lucky enough to have a significant one-time donor.
right.
But if you look at the top five most well-endowed schools, they did that over many, many decades, likely over 100 years.
Yeah. It just reminds me of a podcast interview I did with David Sullivan, who works at Spark. And
Mhm.
this is when David was the head at Breakwater School in Portland. He talked about when he was the head there that he inherited a deficit, brand new head, had to figure out how to cover it, went to a donor and said, "Hey, can you help?" And the donor said to him, famously said to him, David, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money, and then got up and walked out of the room. But the teaching
That's
that like
clever.
what's imagine being brand new head and having that offered to you. But what he learned from that and what this donor really taught him was that if you can build this core non-tuition revenue, it acts as a living endowment, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it provides diversification
Yeah.
in times where one part of your revenue stream may be under stress, other parts may not. And I'll give you an example, Peter. In the higher ed world, where I spent a lot of time, spent a decade and a half. We did some really interesting things. So we had pouring rights contracts with Coca-Cola and Pepsi.
Hmm.
We leased the roofs of our buildings to cell providers, right? We used our infrastructure and our programs to think really creatively. And my premise has always been that whatever happens in higher ed will eventually hit the independent school market in 10 to 20 years. And I think we have to look to higher ed maybe for some guidance on what could work.
Yeah. And this is all leading up to if you last week you and I sent out an announcement that we've launched a new product called Strategy Plus the school operating system, and it's really about offering schools a different pathway when it comes to developing strategy and the execution side of it, and it's rooted in the business model. I mean, that was just such a as we were thinking about and developing it, zeroing in on that, I think that's such a critical component to all of it for you, and I think you've alluded to this already, as we were building this strategic approach, like what made that sequencing feel right to you?
So it is, to me, again, coming from the lens of, the business model has to work before you put anything on top of it.
Yeah.
For me, it is what we've developed is a speedier, more efficient, in my mind, more sensible way to think about attacking a strategy in a market. Um, and that is what appealed to me.
Yeah, same here. And what I'm also excited about is being able to marry this with the execution side. I've had the privilege of working with schools and helping them implement their strategic plans, and see a school be able to make steady weekly progress to realize the vision of the plan is important, and that's I
Mhm.
think a big part of what we're trying to do here is like, yeah, we're going to help you build an amazing strategy rooted in your business model. Like we're going to look at your model, analyze it like it probably hasn't been analyzed in a long time, and then help you build strategy on top of that. But all of that, if you don't have the execution piece tied to it, like it doesn't really matter. I'm curious, like, what's your take on that?
Well, execution also requires accountability, right?
And that's a
So
huge part of it, 100%.
in order to execute properly, you have to have accountability and you have to be willing to let go of the escalation of commitment to certain ideas. If something is not working and you cannot execute it well, it is okay to sunset that program or initiative. And I think sometimes in schools, you see the escalation of commitment
Yeah.
to an initiative simply because it's listed in the strategic plan, right? And I think the flexibility underlying the plan needs to be considered at the front end as well. So for me, it's flexibility, execution, and accountability. They all have to go together.
Yeah. David, when you're analyzing schools' business models, like what are the things that typically surprise people the most when you come out with the results?
Um, Oftentimes, it's how directly linked leadership decisions are to financial results, right?
Mm,
And by leadership, I don't just mean the head of school. I mean the CFO, the chief development officer, and the board. So a decision at the board level is often seen as a command that must be executed. And the link to the financial results, it might take 2 or 3 years to see the link, but there is a link. And in my work over 25 years, I always start every assessment at the board level. I want to know how they make decisions, what data they use to make the decisions, what time frame they have in mind when they're making decisions, and I really want to delve deeply into whether a board is comfortable with management pushback, right? Management knows how to run a school way better than a board.
Right.
And if there's not the ability to push back on those decisions, you're going to see financial results that you may not want in 1, 3, 5, even 10 years.
What does that look like in terms of creating that relationship where, that there is that healthy, kind of ability to push back when, a leadership team looks at it and is like, "Huh, you know what? Like, that may not work."
So I'll give you an example from a client that I have worked with for a while. She'll remain nameless, but a prior board and prior head of school wanted to have a legacy project. They wanted to have a very large building that they thought would be a naming right, and they thought it would add to the allure of the school. But there was no programmatic link. There was no integrated program
Right.
about what would go in that building, how it would be used. There was no market analysis, right? So the school got themselves into debt because donors do not fund a building without a program inside it to know what's going to happen. The school is now dealing with that debt. And that is a decision where a board wanted a legacy project. The management team didn't feel that they could push back or didn't feel that they could slow it down in order to do all the right analyses. And a decade later, the school is stuck with debt with a building that's really pretty, but isn't very valuable.
So how does a head and a board chair establish that kind of, willingness to accept the pushback? Or, just a
So,
healthy dialogue. Maybe pushback's not the right word, but that healthy dialogue.
so I think framework, Peter, right? Agreeing and adopting a framework before generating ideas is very helpful. And that's why I like what we've developed in terms of a strategic framework. You think about it in phases, but you agree at the front end. If something doesn't work, if something's not going to work, we will not push it into phase 2 or phase 3 or phase 4. Agree on that at the front end before generating ideas for programmatic or other initiatives. And remind each other, hey, remember when we agreed 3 months ago that we would raise our voice if something wasn't going to work? I think we're there.
Yeah. That's a really healthy way to start off any project. Hey, last question for you. So imagine you're a head of school or you're a trustee listening to this pod right now, and you're in a competitive market. You're feeling it, from multiple directions. What's the first question that these folks need to be willing to answer if they really want to win their market? Like, to me, strategy is so much about how do you win your market? Because if you win your market, right, you're living your mission in really interesting ways. You're providing those programming for your kids. You've got that mission fit with your families. Like, all the things kind of snap into place if you can win your market.
I think you have to ask in a way that, again, may create tension and may not be comfortable. You have to ask who we want to serve, who will be willing to pay for the product we're giving, right? So that should require a board to go out to the marketplace and get perspectives from the customer about what the school can do, how the school is seen, what the brand reputation is. And the answers to those questions may be very different than the way the board and the heads see their own institution. You have to listen to the customer base because right now in our industry, customers have a lot more power. And this gets back to what we talked about 30 minutes ago. The options are extensive and customers can choose with their tuition dollars, right? So who do you want to serve? How is our school perceived? And let's get actual data-based answers and not conjecture.
With that, David Hanson, founder of Winthrop and Associates. Like, I always love having you on the pod. I'm so excited to work with you on this project. I think it's
Thank you,
really
Peter.
gonna. I can't wait to help schools. But thank you for sharing today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime. I appreciate you, Peter.